Hello again, my name is Patsy Tolan and we're going to be talking today about ethical consuming. We've done some work before in ethical fashion, but I just want to talk today about sort of everyday things that we shop for, that we consume, and some of the stories behind them. So it's not comprehensive, but it's stuff that I've come across regularly and I just want to share with you. It's stuff you would find in a shopping bag. It's like your margarine, your tea, perhaps some chocolate as well, might be nice. Some organic beans. This is all stuff just from my own. Now this definitely isn't from my own cupboard. A bottle of water, which I've come. Maybe even your can of 7-Up or Coke. Maybe some bananas. You might even be getting some soap or other toiletries and things like that. So we want to talk about these. So we're going to be talking about them and I'll explain later on. But we'll be talking about tea and colonialism and where it's growing, and about fair trade as well. We'll be talking about chocolate quite a lot, and again, fair trade chocolate and why. We'll be talking about these two products, which sort of don't seem related, but they both contain palm oil. And even a little, sort of not always just palm oil, but a quick Google of the contents of my bar of soap this morning. When I went to it, I found two things. I found sodium palmate. Sometimes they like to hide what's palm oil in the ingredients. So the sodium palmate. I was a bit shocked as a vegetarian and all to find that there's another thing called sodium tallowate, which is basically the remains of dead animals, hoofs and things like that, boiled down to give you a soapy texture. So I think that's going off my shopping list. I didn't realise that. I'll also be talking about this stuff quite a bit, Roundup. It's sort of coming into summer and people will be using that perhaps on their garden or their streets or whatever. I'm going to talk about flowers, cut flowers and roses. Just a little bit, because we've done quite a lot about fashion, about cotton. Because it is connected to Roundup and it is connected to food as well. And of course, some of the things that we know well that we have choices about, that is things like fair trade bananas. And maybe even talking about why we need to dump the plastic bottle and make sure that you have your own bottle with you. So these things are going to make up today's talk, and I'll ask you to reflect on it, set you a few challenges perhaps, but it's about really making choices yourself. The beginnings of ethical consumption, the beginnings of looking after the planet, looking after the people on the planet, and where you get your ethics from. What's right, what's wrong, and why would we do it? And in the right and wrong section, there are choices all the time. So at the end of this talk, it's back to you and what choices you make, because even small changes like buying only fair trade chocolate starts you thinking ethically and starts you thinking about everything else that you consume in your life and perhaps what's the best to have for the future, yours and mine. Okay, so we'll chat later, we'll get into the slideshow and we'll talk about some of these things. Okay, so we're back on the slideshow. I want to take you through quite a few issues that I just mentioned, and we'll take it from planet Earth right through to what some of the issues are and what perhaps we can do. So again, I'll do this through a slide share. And if we start off again, we're talking about the planet we live on, the threat that it's under, climate change and various others, and in particular at the present time, COVID, pandemics and the pressure we've put on the Earth in many ways. This is sort of summed up in, I suppose, in the words sustainable and sustainability. And we all know we are not living sustainably. We know that, for example, if you want to take Ireland as an example, that we would have used up if all the resources we had were to be used in a year, we have used them all up by April. We are living more than twice beyond our means in terms of fossil fuels instead of climate change and all the other issues that we're going to talk about today. So the pandemic, I suppose, the COVID offers a wee bit of opportunity for recovery. It's possible
that we may have learned some lessons about travel, we may have learned some lessons about consumption, we may have thought a little bit more, we may have appreciated our locality more. So I think it's really important in these days, and whenever you happen to see this particular program, that we look at what we've learned from that and perhaps look to the future and see what can be done better. Sustainability, and we will talk about this. It's about social progress, about human beings and standard of living in people. It's about environmental stewardship, as we know, climate change, waste management. We're going to mention some of these today as well. And it's also about consumption and how we use consumption and what the future is and how that may change. It's all summarized up. We've got a master plan, which is great because the master plan is the global goals developed in 2015, launched in 2016, giving us 15 years to reach the point where perhaps the world is less poor, less hungry, better health, quality education for everyone, gender equality, all these issues that we will talk a little bit about today. That this is the master plan. Every country should have signed up to this. Some haven't, but most have. Those United Nations countries that share sort of a goal for the planet Earth. And this is where in the year 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were launched, 8 of them towards the same end. And then they were looked at, saw what the issues were with them, and redeveloped for 2015 to 2030. And you will be perhaps quite familiar with a lot of these. I suppose my background is going to sort of draw a little bit on Africa and East Africa in particular, where when I worked with Self-Help Africa, I traveled there a lot. And some of the misconceptions I had about the world, were cleared up by actually going there. This particular slide shows Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, a country I always heard had drought and problems with water, and yet when I went there it was bucketing rain and there were floods and all the rest. Seasonal rainfall, yes, but lots of it. It happens to have this exact same rainfall as California, and there's no drought and there's no famine there, and there's swimming pools and theme parks and agriculture and all the rest. So again, it comes down to quite a lot economics. Who's wealthy, who can make use of their resources, and who is not, who has to do with natural rainfall, natural agriculture, and the like. Also, it was cleared up with me because I visited 7 or 8 countries in East Africa, just how big Africa is. As you may know, there are a number of maps that show the size of the areas of continents in the world, and others that show direction. And this, which you might not be quite used to, shows the actual size of Africa compared, for example, to Australia or North America or often Greenland. Have a look at some of the maps perhaps that are on your wall, and you may notice quite a difference in them. Maps that were designed to show direction rather than area. Africa is a huge continent, and we're going to talk a little bit about it because it's one of the most exploited continents as well. And the issues that afflict Africa and that I saw firsthand, the poverty, malnutrition, subsistence farming, the gender inequality that existed there, the lack of markets and how they were being developed, and of course food aid and whether it worked or whether it didn't work was a big issue as well. So those are some of the issues that we would be, I suppose, concerned about in Africa and in many other areas. And today we're going to talk a lot about commercial cash crops, basically how the land and the resources of countries is used for us rather than for the people who live there. The potential for farming, this is Ethiopia again, the potential for farming is huge. Green fields, trees, all of that, as well as areas that have been drought-ridden and over-farmed and all. But the possibility of modern commercial farming as well is there. So the potential is great, and many of the countries of Africa have huge potential, not just to feed themselves, but to feed the rest of the world. And the rest of the world knows that because we use many of these countries to actually grow what we want. And we're going to take a look at some of those. This is not a new phenomenon. This is Africa in the 1800s. And as you can see, it was very much controlled and divided up by the European powers at the time who colonized it And they colonized it basically for one reason. They wanted an area of vast land with a large population that could be subdued to grow the stuff that Europe needed. So France, Britain, Portugal, Germany, all the industrial countries who needed both food products, who wanted metal products, who wanted the gold, the diamonds, the cattle, the tea, the coffee, the chocolate, all those things, Africa was colonized. By the 1960s, by and large, a lot of those countries got their independence from their colonial powers. And we began to learn a lot more about Africa at that time and the issues that were left afterwards, after colonialism. Something that we in Ireland are not unfamiliar with, having been a colony of Great Britain as well. So this, and again, this is repeated around the world, not just in Africa, the impact of colonialism, because what that did, it set up the notion that the rest of the world will produce the goods that we in Europe or the West, the wealthy part of the world, need. And that's good, or that's the way it is. So cash crops of all sorts. From an early time, we had on the left here sugarcane, and sugarcane was grown in the Caribbean, it was grown in Africa, it was grown around the world, and again for the markets for sugar, for both preservation and for baking and all the other uses we have for sugar and confectionery and things like that, and in food preserving, all those, sugar is a massive crop and still is today. In the clearance and developing of a lot of the colonial farms and things, the massive trees from the tropical forests were cut down, and we used them for our furniture, for our building, and during wars for pit props, for trenches, and for defences and things like that. So we exploited many things in these countries, and we still continue to do. Here on the left, we've got cotton, a crop that we would be familiar with as part of the whole web of issues that went around the American Civil War and slavery there, based on the need for cotton and the markets for cotton. Now cotton grown mainly in East Asia, but also in Africa and also in America at the moment. And then food crops like bananas that we're very used to sort of seeing that exist in those countries, that we've become used to being, being able to access, even though they don't grow in our own countries. Cash crops that we may or may not want, this is tobacco. And again, this was one of the huge crops of the sort of colonial and slave trade and slavery in the United States, in the Caribbean, and also now in Africa, the tobacco industry. Again, think about it. This has been grown on land that should be growing food for local markets. On the right here, we have tea plantations. These are in Kenya. And again, this was not the local tea, came from China. It was grown in India by the British. And again, when they colonized parts of Africa, they found that it would grow very well in Kenya, which is, of course, much closer. So large areas of Kenya were taken over and transformed into massive tea plantations as well. This is coffee. The little green pod that's opened up that gives us our coffee beans that we all roast and love, and it's become a fashionable thing today. And again, something that we're used to from both Latin America and Central America, and now from Kenya and even from Vietnam, where most of the sort of lower grade coffee is grown in the world, and has caused huge issues for the environment there. So there's always a competition between commercial crops and the cash crops. People want the cash crops, there's money for them, but it takes investment. Governments want cash crops to generate, and we want cash crops, and the colonial powers, who perhaps still own land, they want the cash crops as well. But that leads to sort of issues. It means that food crops, like potatoes, like beans, like this is teff from a grain from Ethiopia, these food crops become under competition. Sometimes it even reaches the stages where it's cheaper to import food to a poor country than to bother growing it, because the country itself might be more profitably used to grow, whether it is tea or whether it is tobacco or something, for us. So you get a great divide and unequalness in all of these crops and all of these issues around the world. then because of the nature of farming and growing as well, we have also the issues that come out of that as well. They're not just about the economics, but for example, about gender. Um, you know, about 80% of farm work in Africa is done by women, people who are not treated equally. So farming and rural lifestyle and colonial imprint and the need to grow cotton or to grow tea actually keeps gender inequality a big issue in many countries as well. And it means again that women have to both work for their families, but and also try and market and sell along the side of the road. So again, gender equality is one of the huge issues that has come out of all of this. And that's this one picture, would summarize gender inequality, the huge loads, the burden that women have got to carry in all sorts of ways, whether it's water or hay or wood or whatever else. And also, again, children working within the whole system to keep food on the table, to keep cash crops flowing. They're overburdened with what they need. So this whole demand that the West puts on these countries, we need to look at it carefully. For example, in our overuse of meat and our increasing demand for meat around the world and meat products, we're destroying huge areas of tropical, this is Brazil, destroying huge areas of tropical forest, and we have cattle grazing then coming in. This is all about low cost production. And as we know, in Brazil, over the past number of years, massive areas of the tropical rainforest have been destroyed. Now, they haven't even in this case taken the trouble to log them as they did in the past and collect the wood. It's cheaper to burn them. And as we know, that releases massive amounts of carbon and has contributed to climate change. So it's an environmental disaster, all fueled by our demand for more meat because we want cheaper and we want more variety and all the rest. In a way that leads then, if we become more and more dependent on colonial countries or past colonial countries of Latin America or Central America or Africa or Asia, if we become dependent, as we have, on food from those countries, then we're going to increase food miles, that distance between where food is grown and where it's consumed. So take a look at this one. Some Tesco fresh peas produced in Guatemala and Latin America, like 2,000-3,000 miles away to produce peas that we can grow in our own back gardens. That really is unsustainable. We need to look within Europe, within Ireland, at what we're consuming, where it's coming from, and the damage that it's doing to the climate, and remember, to the people, to the environment, to the economics of the countries that we're coming from. Okay, that's a lot to take in. We might just pause on that, and I'd ask you to maybe think a little bit about that, maybe some of the issues that have come up that you may or may not be aware of, discuss them among yourselves, think about them, and maybe record a decision or what you think is an important issue in it that you might like to find out more about, or perhaps you have opinions about some of this, the way that the world has created the poorer countries in the world as the bread baskets and the cash crop areas to feed the West and the wealthy. We know that's right inherent in the world at the moment. During COVID-19 and the vaccination programs, we know that the vast majority of vaccinations have been administered in the wealthy countries in the world. Something like 10 countries have consumed 40% of all the vaccinations. And tragedies like those in India at the present time, where not alone are vaccinations not available, but even oxygen and healthcare is not available to people. We have created, by our worldview, the poverty in the world. So I'll stop there, have a think about it. We'll come back in a while and we'll continue on, maybe looking at some of the companies that are responsible for some of this unethical trading. Okay, so you've had a little bit of time maybe to think and discuss and record or think where you're going with some of these issues. What I want to do now is take a look at some of the if you like, the guilty. Who's behind this? You know, I can say the West, but it's like neither you nor I are actually sort of exploiting people. But you know, if you're a consumer of Coca-Cola, if you're a consumer of Nestle products, if you're a consumer of Kellogg's, then in a way you are part of the problem, because if we invest in these companies by buying their products, by supporting them, then we invest and we say that the way that they are developing their products is okay. And we're going to take a look at some of these, and they are far from okay. Let's just take a look. We'd start just with Nestle, the biggest food producing company in the world, with headquarters in Switzerland. And we know them for our Smarties and our Kit Kat and our Snickers bar and our Crunchies and all the rest, you know, but many other products. Other people would know them from back in the 60s, because Nestle were one of they produced powdered milk and cocoa and things like that. And they were involved in the promotion in many sub-Saharan African countries of infant formula. In other words, bottles for children. So, you know, in an area where, or in a culture where breastfeeding was quite natural, but because of food shortages and because of issues of health, children were not thriving because the mothers were not thriving themselves. So in steps Nestle and says, we can supply baby formula. And they did. You know, most women who went to healthcare centres, had a baby, came out with a month's supply of baby formula made by Nestle, but just a month's supply. And then they had to buy it. And of course, being poverty stricken, they couldn't afford it. Also, Nestle didn't take into account and didn't bother thinking about clean water to produce the baby food. They didn't think about the amount of firewood to boil the water and whether or not things would be sterilised. And in the first year of Nestle introducing this baby formula strategy in sub-Saharan Africa, the number of infant births increased through the improper production and all the rest of the bottles with dirty water and unsanitary situations that couldn't really be changed. Now, Nestle continues to do that today around the world. They promote the use of infant formula, where perhaps breastfeeding is a much better and a much safer and a much more natural way to feed children. So Nestle are not just involved in your Kit Kats and things like that, you know, which you might want to think about. And remember, I talked about fair trade as a very good option to that. They're also involved, in water. And one of the great quotes I like to sort of share about is the CEO of Nestle said, "Access to water should not be a public right." He wanted water privatized. He believed that it should be privatized. Nestle around the world sell bottled water. Now let's go to a really good authority and the Simpsons and what was said here. And this again, Nestle is a horrible company. Has been taking water from a village in Pakistan, refusing to allow them to pipe into their village. They only allow them to get it if they buy through Nestle. They've also misinformed many mothers with their advertising of baby formula, causing many infant deaths. And this was a program by Reddit, an online company, to if you like, hate or ban Nestle from using their services, and to sort of take a look at the ethics of what was going on. So Lisa Simpson, I think if Lisa says it, we have to believe it. But Nestle, this is happening all across the world. Nestle are simply taking water from the ground, bottling it, and selling it. And remember, we'll talk a little bit later about the whole ethics of plastic and plastic bottles and plastic water bottles and all of that. It's totally unethical and wrong and bad for the planet and bad for the seas and the land and all the rest. But when it's headed by someone who says water isn't everyone's right, it should be privatized. There are many campaigns going on around the world against Nestle companies in America and in Latin America and in Africa and in Asia, where Nestle, because they're not touching the land, simply extract water, purify it and sell it. So that's the ethics of a company, you know, like from baby formula to, and we'll talk about chocolate now shortly, to water and all the rest. So they are the biggest food producing company in the world. So we need to look at do we support them, or do we look a bit more carefully at what we're buying, and is it a Nestlé product, and what might be the result of perhaps boycotting them? I like chocolate, and I suppose most of you like chocolate as well. But the background of chocolate, produced most of Europe's chocolate is produced in Ghana, 60% of it or more, and countries like Belgium, France, Italy, Great Britain have huge investment in the chocolate business there. But again, from colonial times, to keep the price of chocolate low, slavery was commonplace. And today, slavery is still commonplace. Slavery is still commonplace. According to a 2018 Cocoa Barometer report by 15 European NGOs, said as many as 2.1 million child labourers are working in West Africa alone. Now think about that. Your chocolate, your Kit Kats, your Nestle, your Mars. That industry is being kept alive and being kept profitable for the investors of Nestle and the other companies by the unethical practice of child labour and exploitation. So around Ghana are some of the poorest countries in the world. So some of the poorest countries in the world are also some of the most exploited and exploitable. So just think about that for a moment as to, how do you want to think what happens? And then take a look at this, because again, the investment in this product in cocoa is really a national investment in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire and other countries around the West Africa. In recent years, a handful of organisations have exposed the widespread use of child labour, in some cases slavery, on cocoa farms. Since then, the industry has become increasingly secretive, making it difficult for reporters not only to access farms where human rights violations are occurring, but also they can't disseminate this information to the public. In 2010, in the Cote d'Ivoire, the government authorities detained 3 newspaper journalists after they had published an article exposing government corruption in the cocoa sector. The farms of West Africa supply cocoa to Hershey's, Mars, Nestle, revealing the industry's direct connection to the worst forms of child labour, human trafficking, and slavery. That's where your chocolate comes from. That's the ethics of the people who supply you with your chocolate. We'll look later at perhaps actions, and you might like to think about actions. But for me, this is the only action that allows me to enjoy chocolate. And I mean enjoy it, not just the taste of it, but the fact that it's not exploiting children in West Africa. That is to buy fair trade chocolate. So the only chocolate I will buy is fair trade chocolate, because fair trade has 5 pillars that sort of keep the whole ethics of fair trade products correct. One of them you will know is a fair price to the people who farm it. Another one is that gender equality is promoted and women are not exploited. Another one is that no child labour will be used in fair trade products. The other 2 are the protection of the environment, and then the money or part of the profit from products that are fair trade going back into the community for education and healthcare and other things. So as a simple, if you like, if you have concerns about your chocolate, there is a simple answer: just buy fair trade. And if you can't get fair trade, well, question your local shop and say, you want to buy fair trade. These are the actions we need to take. By doing it individually, we'll start thinking about the ethics of something as common as the chocolate industry that we have. I mentioned earlier, and I showed you the my bar of soap, and one of the main ingredients of that is palm oil, which has become a huge issue in the world. Palm oil was product that came from West Africa. It grew as palm trees. It produced a sort of a kernel, a nut, and when you either boil it or squeeze it, you get palm oil. The wonderful thing about palm oil is you can't taste it and you can't smell it. So you can really add it to anything. You can add it to soap, you can add it to food, and you know, to chocolate and things like that, and you can't smell it. So if you can produce it really cheaply, you can double your profits. So the problem is that to produce it really cheaply, you have to farm it really cheaply and you have to be unethical. So the two pictures you have here is a huge palm oil plantation in Indonesia, and here is sort of locally what happens when you just simply take away all the tropical forests. You know, this is part of our climate change, part of our oxygen in the world. You destroy the forest and you plant palm trees to grow. Now, the problem with that in getting our oil, these are the palm nuts, is that environment is the environment of tigers, of the orangutan, of many species of birds and animals that only survive in places like Indonesia and tropical rainforests. And the orangutan has been the one that has been highlighted most. It is an endangered species simply because the forest they used to live in has been cut down and we now have palm oil. And again, palm oil is reckoned to be in, and here's an example, about 40% of everything in your local supermarket contains palm oil. Your beverages, your Cokes and 7-Ups and all the rest. Your food, everything from tinned food to dried food to your ketchups to mustards to anything else, dried soups and all. Ice cream and biscuits and stuff like that contain palm oil. Then personal care, you know, deodorants and toothpaste and all the rest, and shampoos contain palm oil. Cleaning products, whether it's for clothes or whatever else, contain palm oil, and of course cosmetics. So the palm oil is added to those because in itself it's a very good product. You know, it's odorless and it's very good for you, but that's fine. But the trouble is to get it cheaply, it has become something that has destroyed vast areas of tropical rainforest by unscrupulous and unethical companies to produce it cheaply so that they can make loads of money. And that's unethical. So we're going to take another wee break because that's stuff that is very much to ourselves. You know, that we know it's your sort of it's your shopping. It's what you might buy, and I want you to think about that. What should we do? Is this a personal choice? And should we look at? Well, the first thing we should do is educate ourselves about what is there, what's in our food, and what's in our cosmetics, and what's in our care products, and then we need to think about what action might we take from that. Do we change ourselves? Do we campaign? Do we go to the shops? Do we go to the producers? You might discuss some of that and record maybe some thoughts on it as to actions that might be taken. Because this is about action. We need to learn about this and then we need to think, okay, what can we do about it? So again, I'll leave you to think about that a little bit before we come on next, and we're going to be talking about seeds and food and a company called Monsanto. Okay, so I hope you've had a few thoughts about chocolate and foods and other materials and things like that really are daily products for us and something we can actually act on. I wanted to talk now about seeds. One of the things, again, if we go back to developing countries, is that they are trying to produce more food, so they're looking for better seed and better quality seed, and how do they access it and where do they get it? And there is a huge scandal going on in the world today about that. And these are just some photographs that I've taken from travels in East Africa, where farmers are saving seed and sharing it and looking at better quality products that would perhaps be more drought resistant or more disease resistant, and they share them. And there's lots of cooperatives doing that. You can save seed. The two men on the left I met in Ethiopia, and they produce these are onions. This is onion seed. So they grow their onions, let them go to the seed, collect the seed, and then sell it to other farmers around the area. So I mean, in Ireland today, there's a huge enthusiasm among community gardens and other people to save seed and to share it with each other rather than buy foreign varieties or whatever. So there are, of course, many seed companies, who are involved in the production of that. So let's just take a look at one of the situations that exist there. And, seed from everything from crops and trees, and whether it's fruit trees, whatever. We see a little co-op here producing trees for distribution for soil erosion purposes, or potato seed, something we'd be very familiar with and would be very common in Ireland. But one of the companies that's at the forefront of the whole discussion on seed is this company, Monsanto. Now, why the pictures that I have? And Monsanto began as a company back in the 30s and 40s and the last 1930s and 40s, and they began as a chemical company making lubricants for the industry, for oils and things like that for various companies. So they worked in chemical production and things like that, but not too big. Then during the 1960s, America got involved in the war in Vietnam. And one of the issues in Vietnam that they had was that the Americans fought the war quite a lot from the air. They flew helicopters over, and they gunned and they fired rockets and all on the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese who were fighting against them. But one of the issues that they came up with into the war was that they simply, with the dense tropical forest in Vietnam, they couldn't see the enemy. So a tender went out in the United States to chemical companies for somebody who could perhaps solve the problem. And what they were looking for was a defoliant, something you could spray on the trees, and then you could come back and the trees would lose all their leaves and you would have left with bare wood, and you could see the enemy and kill them more efficiently. Now, the problem, first of all, the ethics of a company who made their money on that is very, very questionable. But also the problem was within this chemical, and it became famous because, as you can see here, it's a reddy-orange color. When flying over, the army said, right, we want to be able to fly over today and spread the stuff, and then we want to be able to go back a few days later and see where we sprayed and what's happening. So they put a dye into it, an orange-red dye, so it became known as Agent Orange. Now, unfortunately, Agent Orange also contained dioxins, which are cancerous and which can cause birth defects and all the rest. And those issues are still being dealt with in Vietnam today, 60 years later. So the deforestation of the environment. So you can imagine, again, the ethics of a company, and, well, the United States have been involved in the war, that made us money on that. Now, they then went on, having been successful in building up their money, to take a look at other ways that they could use this defoliant or pesticide. And they came up with a product called Roundup. And Roundup was a weed killer and pesticide killer. It was wonderful. You could spray it and stuff and it killed the weeds. But also, of course, it gets into the food. So there's a problem with that. In the 1980s, genetic modification, with the discovery of the genome and all, genetic modification became possible in plants. You could genetically modify a plant in any way you wanted. There were many, many different approaches to this, but Monsanto got involved because one of the crops that they had, that they were producing or that they were helping grow at the time, was cotton. And cotton, we'll talk about it as part of the clothing industry. Cotton is notoriously difficult to keep weeds off and to grow successfully. So what Monsanto did was that they went into the area of genetically modifying cotton seed, so that when you sprayed it with Roundup, the weeds would die, but the cotton wouldn't. So now you have a genetically modified cotton seed that you can spray as many times as you like with pesticides and insecticides, these Roundup products, and the cotton would be great. The problem about it is, of course, that you're spraying these dioxins and chemicals into the ground, into the soil, and it's going to stay there or wash off into the water. Cotton is not so bad because, of course, we don't need it. So you wear it and maybe that's okay. But then, of course, Monsanto thought, well, let's see how far we can go with this. So they got into corn, maize. They got into soya. they get into tomatoes, they get into potatoes, they get into a whole raft of food crops where they genetically modified the seed to be resistant to Roundup. So now what they were encouraging farmers to do was you can grow your maize, your corn, or your soya. Let's just take soya because it's an interesting one. And the soya is used mainly for animal feed, but it's also used in baby formula. So you can spray the soya with the Roundup. It doesn't go into the soya crop, but it goes on the leaves and it goes into the soil. And again, there would be many people who would contend that the genetic modification and the spraying of this is getting through the food chain to us as well. Now, you may think, oh, well, I don't eat too much soya. But you may like to, if you're a meat eater, if you're not a vegetarian like I would be, you may like to think that all the food supplement, all the food supplements that we use for cattle and sheep in Ireland come from genetically modified soya and corn. Go to your local farmers co-op and check it up. There are one or two organic farmers in Ireland who are actually promoting the use of non-GM food substitutes or food additives for their cattle and their sheep. But the reality is we are consuming, even though genetically modified seed is not allowed in Europe in the EU at the moment because we know the dangers from it. There's no problem with it in America because they're making huge money from it and the politics is defending it. And there are huge issues around genetic modification in America. In Europe, we defend against it. In Ireland, we're not allowed to grow genetically modified crops, but all our animal feeds are coming from the United States and other countries who produce them in this way. And we're sort of stuck with that coming into our food chain. So Monsanto, with its DDT that we're involved in, its Agent Orange, PCBs, growth hormones, etc. Is this what you want your food to have, or do you want to have it organic? But in around the world, genetically modified organisms are found in 80% of packaged food in the United States, and it's not well labeled. We don't know. One of the problems with the United States is they don't have to label it. So soya, which is into your soya milk, into your food, into your into all sorts of supplements, into dried foods. Cotton, the industry of cotton, canola, oil, we call it rapeseed oil, corn, zucchini, or we call courgettes, papayas, sugar beets, are hugely using genetically modified seed and therefore are more than likely using the products that Monsanto produce, particularly Roundup, to spray. Now, Monsanto would like us to believe that they have an answer to disease and drought in the developing world, that they can produce drought-resistant and disease-resistant crops with their genetic modification that will help the developing world, which really is a load of nonsense because, first of all, the threat from genetically modified seed may or may not be sort of dangerous for us. But to get into this type of farming, you need lots of money. You need to be able to buy their seed. You need to be able to buy their pesticide because that's the only one that works with it. And poorer farmers simply can't do that. So what Monsanto are saying is not the truth. And again, I would just simply say, do you believe a company who made their money with a pesticide or a defoliant in the Vietnamese War that's still causing problems? Would you believe a company who are have created a seed that even if you save it, will not produce new seed? And Monsanto have taken hundreds, if not thousands, of farmers to court who have tried to refuse to use their seed or to use it in different ways. So again, Monsanto in particular, you might like just to think about. Do you want your food to be genetically modified? Do you want to think perhaps is organic food better? Do you want your food to be sprayed, incessantly with this? It's reckoned that, for example, a soya crop in Latin America and somewhere like Brazil would be sprayed 20 times during the growing season with Roundup. Now, I simply don't believe that that doesn't get into the soil and doesn't get into the crops and doesn't get into our ecosystem. I don't think it's the way we should be growing food. So have a think about that again, and perhaps thinking, if you have any thoughts on it, or maybe you'd like to do a little bit more research on it before we move on to the last section of this talk, where I want to talk about water. I want to talk a little bit about the fashion industry and plastics before we finish today. Okay, so we're going to take a sort of a slanted look at the fashion industry, and we're going to combine it with a look at water. And I just want you to take a look at this. This is in the production of various things, whether it's a sheet of paper, where you have to grow the wood, and you have to bleach the paper and wash it and do various things. It takes 10 litres of paper to make 10 litres of water to make one sheet of paper. So there's lots of that. Take a look at this one. It takes over 10,000 litres of water to make one pair of jeans. 10,000 litres of water. Now, the interesting thing about it is we've got to think about is that 10,000 litres of water to make the pair of jeans you want in Ireland doesn't come from Ireland. That water comes from China or Indonesia or Africa, Ethiopia. That's where the water is coming from, because that's where the cotton is growing. That's where the industry is. So in a way, by fueling industries that are about coffee or plastics or bread or beef or leather or jeans or whatever else, by fueling these industries, not by wanting more of them and by wanting more of the developing countries to grow them for us, we are literally depleting them of water. In countries where water is so precious, in countries where water is so polluted, like this picture taken in Ethiopia, of animals drinking, people washing clothes, and people collecting water to take home. We expect those countries actually to produce for us, and we take a look later on at another product that uses this water in a country that really needs water for its own food growth. Ethiopia, again, the potential to grow food is there, but water is very scarce and has to be saved, as in this case here, beside a school, of saving water through the rainy season so that they can produce, so that children can come to school. So water is a big issue. And again, we've seen this before, and again, it crosses over into the area of gender equality, because water is one of those things that women do or are expected to do. So the demand for water, if water becomes scarce in a village or a town or a lake or a river because of industry and cotton growth, then women have to walk further for clean water. So again, our incessant need for products, whether it's food or cotton or whatever it happens to be from poorer countries, is putting a bigger burden on women, because they're the people, women and children, who have to carry the water. So your pair of jeans, you might like to pause at the moment and ask, or just do a show of hands. How many people in the class now own a pair of jeans? How many people own two pairs? And see how far you get up to 10, and how many people own so many pairs of jeans. In other words, more than we need. So it takes a kilogram of cotton to, in India, it will use 20,000 litres of water. So all of that means that the people of India are losing their water supply for the production of cotton for us to have cotton clothing. If they stopped producing it, everybody in India would have 100 litres of water every day for a year. That's us. We're putting that pressure. Now, linked to it, and going back to the whole issue of Monsanto, 50% of all the pesticides used in India are used in the cotton production industry, and that's Monsanto and that's Roundup. So not alone as the cotton putting pressure on people to work for very little, it's putting pressure on their water supply, and it's destroying their environment with the use of pesticides, mainly Roundup and Monsanto, because Monsanto control more than 90% of all the world's cottonseed. Now, this whole, we've talked about this before in fast fashion, and we have another workshop on that. But this whole thing results, again, in the industries in those countries being underfunded, being done without care, and resulted as we know, in Bangladesh, in the collapse of a factory in a place called Rana Plaza, killing 1,134 people in here working, making clothes, cotton clothes for us, and injured 4,000, and has been was the worst clothing factory disaster in the world. And yet those types of factories are still going. That type of demand for cheap clothing we're still fueling, and it's putting all sorts of environmental and human pressures on people to supply us with this. Cotton being produced all around the world, in China, India, USA, Pakistan. So each one of those countries is supplying us not just with cotton, but with cheap labor. We're destroying the environment of each one of those countries, right? And we're taking the water from each one of those countries as well. So cotton becomes denim to fuel our need for cheap clothes. And the Monsanto connection is very much there. Cotton needs seed. Monsanto own the patent for the seed, and they own the patent for the Roundup, and they control the world cotton industry. So the more we fuel that industry, the more we support it, the more we support Monsanto. In the end result, who's been ethical about this? What companies within the clothing and the fashion industry are trying to do something better? And this rating of the best and the worst shows that Levi Strauss and Inditex and H&M are among the better companies of the world who are trying to change this whole pressure of fast fashion and the pressure we're putting on people to work for less and endangering their health and their environment. Surprisingly enough, Primark and Nike, who we might in Converse, so you might be aware of, come in the top half, so they are improving. These are companies who were very, very poor, but have been forced, I suppose, through market forces to try and improve what they're doing. And at the bottom, you have companies that you would know from your shopping centres, Claire's Accessories or Hermes or Chanel or Prada or Monsoon Accessories. They're very unethical, both environmentally and in human ways, and in the way that they're exploiting people in the world. We'll take another pause on that just to sort of think about the fashion industry and what we're doing to the fashion industry, and not just about the fashion and the cotton, but about the water, about Monsanto, about the damage to the environment, about the climate change issue that comes from us wanting cheap clothing without thinking, where's it coming from? And what's the result of that on people and on environments around the world? Okay, just a few other sort of, I suppose, issues that I came across that I'll share just with you as well. Just this one is very, very particular. As we know, all the stuff that's left over after we have our iPads and our computers and our phones and all the rest, all of that contains quite a lot of toxic materials. And in the EU, we're not allowed to dump them into landfill. So what do? We put them into ships and we send them off to Ghana. That's the same country that's producing your chocolate, because they have very, very poor environmental laws, and 30% of imports, allegedly second-hand products, were useless despite EU efforts calling for electronic goods to have some reusable value. In other words, we're not supposed to send this stuff abroad. We're only supposed to send stuff that can be developed or refurbished, but that's just nonsense, right? So 85% of the containers arriving in Ghana with electrical and electronic goods came from Europe, from us. And they're poisoning the land, they're poisoning the poor. And outside Ghana, in Accra, the capital, there is the biggest dump of IT material. That's phones, screens, pads, motherboards, all that junk. The biggest dump in the world. And that's the way we're using Ghana. And remember, this is the country that's supplying us with most of our chocolate as well. So pollution, the pollution issues, and you'll be well aware of these. I don't want to go through much into this because that's a whole other area. But we have water pollution, we have oil pollution, marine dumping, all sorts of issues around the world. And again, the global warming problem that goes with the dumping. One of the areas, as we know, and we go back to Nestle, and we mentioned earlier that we have created since the 1980s, or certainly since the 1970s, we have created the plastic problem since then. When I was growing up, you went to the shop, you bought a bottle of Coke, it came in a glass bottle, you drank it, you were charged a couple of cents or pence at that stage on the bottle, and you got the money back when you returned the bottle. And it was cleaned, recycled, and reused. We didn't have a waste problem with plastic, and we certainly didn't have a waste problem with bottled water. Bottled water didn't exist before the 1980s. So this is a modern issue, a modern problem that we have created. So, like, I mean, you know the facts. You've probably heard these over again about plastic bottles. It took 700 years for them to compost. 90% of the cost of bottled water is just the bottle, and probably even less than that. 80% of the plastic bottles aren't recycled. Particularly in Ireland, we have a very poor reputation in recycling. And really, this needs to change. So the plastic bottle scandal, the plastic bottle waste product that we've done, both the problems with people like Nestle consuming water, privatizing it, the notion that water that we drink only comes in a bottle, we need to change that. And it needs to change, as I said, with us, and it needs to change, within our schools, within our homes, within our sports and all the rest. This is a problem we've created in the past 30 years or so, and it's very quickly reversible if we take the effort. I mean, we did that with plastic shopping bags in Ireland. I'm coming to the end now and finishing off, and I want to just talk about, I suppose, one of the worst examples of waste and of the West abusing the resources and all of a country. When working with Self-Help Africa, I had travelled a number of times to Ethiopia, and this is on my last occasion. And I was very surprised when we came to a particular project area to be greeted with some women and children who were giving us roses, and I was wondering where they came from, and discovered that a Dutch firm had set up a very large rose farm close by, and these were sort of rejects and all that they had got to give to us just as gifts. But in doing that, like having thought about it, I thought, well, this is something for us. And Ethiopia is producing flowers, and when I went in to research it, I found that the Dutch, who produce a lot of the flowers for Europe, companies like Flora Holland, in the past 10 to 15 years had moved to Africa, moved particularly to Ethiopia, to Kenya, and to Nigeria, because there they were able, because of the weather and sunshine, they were able to produce roses in particular and other cut flowers during our winter here in Europe at a very low cost. Also, of course, they were able to exploit cheap labor, particularly young women who do most of this work. They were able to exploit lax environmental laws, so water quality and pumping water back into lakes and things is not well monitored, and health and safety isn't good. And I witnessed like hundreds of young women underneath sort of cover picking roses and pesticides in the air around them. So all of that means that the Dutch can produce really cheap flowers for Europe, and it's on a very massive scale. Last year, Ethiopia alone, of the three countries, exported 600 million euros worth of roses to Europe. So it just means that when we buy, a bunch of roses or whatever else, you end up exploiting the people, you end up exploiting the environment, you're damaging the environment, you end up exploiting the water for something really that we don't need. And we have to admit this, that we don't need roses grown in Ethiopia and Nigeria at all. It's of no benefit to them whatsoever. Low paid wages, damaging their environment is not something that they need from us. And that environmental damage. This is one of the cut flower areas. This isn't glass actually. This is to protect the roses from too much sunshine. But in Kenya, one of the lakes of the Rift Valley, Lake Naivasha, is the breeding ground for pink flamingo, one of the few in the world. And yet this lake is becoming highly polluted by the runoff from farms like this into the lake. They use the water. It's then contains pesticides. It contains nutrients and things that are not natural to the area. And This is affecting the sort of natural environment for the breeding of these birds. They will disappear, along with many other species, because of the level of pollution. And remember, simply because we want flowers during the winter, during February, when we want to give Valentine's roses, and during March, when we want to give Mother's Day roses. We need to change that habit. So, to finish off, my other least favorite global company, Coca-Cola Company, who have a reputation around the world for many abuses of human rights, very many abuses of labor laws and all the rest, from Latin America right across into Eastern Europe and all. And the Coca-Cola Company, apart from the plastic bottle and all the rest, and the sort of economics of what they're doing, they have a particular method of producing the Coca-Cola within each country. So their big demand is vast amounts of water, both for the plant and for the making of the thing itself. Particularly in India, they have been accused and proven and taken to court and closed and reopened factories. They've been accused of taking water from large rural areas. This would be typical of an open well in an Indian area. They dig large sort of holes into the ground, and during good times the water will be up high, and then it'll get lower and lower. So that may be a depth of maybe even anything up to 10 meters. They're taking water down into the water table under the ground. But local Coca-Cola Company factories, what they're doing is they're drilling 20 meters under the ground, sucking water from lower down, and this groundwater level decreases and decreases, and often during the summer goes dry. And this has been proven, and the Coca-Cola Company have just ignored it. They've gone to court, they paid the fine to open the factory again. And of course, they're popular, they're global, and they can do this sort of thing anywhere. So we've got to think about, how we deal with the ethics of companies like this, the ethics of companies who exploit people, who exploit environments, who advertise and if you like, dupe us into buying their wonderful products without any of the knowledge behind it. This is the sort of the ethical dilemma we have to think about. Do we want to continue this lifestyle where a large proportion of the people and the environment and the land and the water of the world and the resources of the world are used at a very cheap cost to give us a lifestyle of buying too many clothes, a lifestyle of eating chocolate, of drinking Coke, of drinking tea, of having coffee, all at a low price to keep us sort of happy. But that low price is at the cost of the rest of the world. We know, and you know, that the gap between the richer people of the world, and that's us, and the poorer people of the world, whether it's in Latin America and India and Southeast Asia and Africa, that gap is getting wider and wider. And even as we know, at the present time, in May of 2021, India is undergoing a catastrophe in trying to deal with COVID-19. We are running ahead with vaccinations. India is struggling simply to keep people alive. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying just because they don't have healthcare, they don't have oxygen, they don't have space to do people, and they simply are not getting the vaccinations. We need to change things like that in the world. So I suppose for us, for you and for I, the question is, how do we do that? You might want to spend some time now thinking about that. Is this something you want to do personally? Things that I would do. I'm a vegetarian. I buy fair trade. I try to look on what I'm doing. First of all, I try not to buy if I don't need it, and if I have to buy it, I buy it ethically if possible. I think about travel. I think about energy use and things like that. So, that's a personal thing we can do. Whether that influences, I'm not sure, but I think by example, sometimes it does. Maybe you want a campaign. Maybe you want your school to take a look at some of these issues, like, for example, the issue of water bottles in the school, if that is an issue in the school, or Coca-Cola, or Nestlé's chocolate. An example set by a group of students, a group of young people, is a very powerful thing, as we know that from the climate change marches over the past number of years. So part of all that is to think about these issues, think about the global companies who are exploiting us and exploiting the people of the developing world. discuss it and see perhaps and record maybe some actions that you want to take.
Okay, I hope you got something out of the whole presentation. There was a lot in that, probably something that you may have spent a few classes or a few times doing. As I said, we've touched on some of the, I suppose, the major global companies in the world who I would consider to be quite unethical in the way that historically and even to the present day they exploit the people, they exploit the environment. And if we continue to support them, it's like investing your money with a company. If we buy their product, then we endorse them and say they're okay. I think we should be looking at what we consume, learn a bit more about it, and then make the decision you want. You know, make the simple decision. You go into the shop, buy their fair trade bananas. You're supporting people, you're supporting environment, you're campaigning against child labour and gender equality. All of that simply by making that choice. Or the same, the chocolate that I buy from Lidl or Aldi is fair trade chocolate. Same thing. Fair trade will sort of help you sort of do that. And again, with our roses, just grab the wrapping from that, and you can see our fair trade roses came from Africa, particularly from Ethiopia. And again, not ideal in the end up, because we are buying a product from thousands of miles away, and that's contributing to air miles. But if you do have to do something, if you do want to buy roses, if you do want to buy the chocolate, if you do want to buy something, then at least make an informed choice. What am I doing with this, and why am I buying this? And remember, that's going to create an example for, you know, when you go home and you talk about some of this and have a look at what's in the cupboards and maybe go along and do the shopping the next time. You're educating someone else, and the more we do, the more we campaign, the more we change, the more we, you know, just simply by consuming, the more we do that, the more we are going to change the world. You really do, I'm sure, want to be the change that you want in the world. So do that through action, simple actions, and inform yourself about the world that you live in, and hopefully we'll create a much better one for you and your future and for your children as well. Thank you very much.